Bob Nemick. I'm a senior associate with Griffin-Hammis Associates. In fact, I am the senior associate chronologically at Griffin-Hammis Associates. And I've been with GHA since 2009. And prior to that, I spent 30 years as a provider. So oftentimes I refer to myself as a recovering provider. So I can relate to the things that you all do who are in the provider world from pretty much every piece of service delivery, from direct service to executive director. So so I think that gives me kind of a unique prism from which I'm able to observe different things and make comments about. We've been doing since COVID struck. You know, we had changed our. It really affected us in a big way because I think in 2018, maybe 2018, I can't even think about the number of miles I logged. I think I was in California 5 times and out in South Carolina and places on the East Coast. So we ran, we're an organization that comes to our customers, and of course, with travel restrictions and everything like that, that really threw us a curveball that we had to deal with. And so a couple of things that we did was that we started to really ramp up our virtual ACRE training, which is different from the online ACRE training, right? So I know there are some people here that I recognize some names of people who have either been in or are about to be in the online course, which is a 12-week or 6-week or 12-week course, depending on which option you choose. But the virtual course was literally a 40-hour course that we were teaching in teams. So teams of 2 of us from Griffin-Hammis each took one of the sections of the ACRE training and would do what amounted to I think 6 days or something like that per session. And so we got to be pretty good at dealing with Zoom and I think pretty much everybody's gotten decent at dealing with Zoom, and so you're all Zoom literate, I hope. But just to remind you, please mute your microphones. And secondly, your cameras are optional. I mean, I always like to see people's faces and all that, but once I get going, I'm not going to be able to do that. One of the beauties of when we were working in teams, like Beth Keaton and I were doing the systematic instruction segments, is that while Beth was talking, I was able to monitor the chat and also, kind of watch people's faces and things like that, which is no substitute for being in person with people. There's, you can't replace that organic quality, and vice versa, right? When I was doing my parts of the presentation, Beth would be on the monitor thing. So that's kind of, I mean, Dallas, who's our administrative guy, he'll be kind of watching those sorts of things. But I just want to let you know that we're not going to have a whole lot of time for questions. And if we have 70 people or whatever on this thing, it would be chaos, right? To try and deal with that. So what it'll do is 2 things. One of them is if you have questions, and you just can write them into the chat, and I'm hope to kind of be finished by about 10 till, and be able to take time to deal with questions. So that's one option. And the second one is to email me, right? If there's something that I talk about or questions and you need, you want more clarification, you can email me, and Dallas will put up my email address in the chat. And the only thing I ask is, if you do email me, tell me how I know you. All right. So I say, well, I was in this conversation that you did. So that's just a couple of things. I might run, we might go a few minutes over with questions, but again, it's optional. You don't have to stick around. You're done, that's it. We'll see you, and see you down the road. The other thing that we started to do with the pandemic affecting so much of what people were doing was we started to have these community conversations where we were just, like on Fridays, we do like an hour topical kind of thing and just sort of touch on it. So I just want to let you know that this won't be in depth, right? We're not going to get into the weeds on informational interviews because you could spend days talking about it. So I'm just going to kind of talk about what I think are the dynamics and some of the things that I hear, some of the feedback that we get about informational interviews. I just did a session with a community of practice in California maybe 2 weeks ago, and we really focused a lot on the informational interview piece of it and how you get to them. So it's a topic that seems to have a lot of interest and perhaps some confusion. So I'll try to clarify as I see it, right? So talk about some of those things. So with that, I'm going to put up my screen, and I have like a bit of a PowerPoint here. And I really struggle with the whole notion of PowerPoints. I've been trying to kind of wean myself away from PowerPoints. I think that I heard someone say one time, this is the crack cocaine for presenters. So for me, when I use PowerPoints, it's mainly a substitute for 5x7 index cards, right? Like if you're in speech class, right? To remember what you're supposed to talk about. So let me put that up, and okay, and it's going to be a
yes, damn it.
Okay, so I think I hear an awful lot about employer engagement, right? I mean, it's in a lot of different places. Like if you talk about the IPS, individual placement and supports, right? I mean, they talk about employer engagement, employer contact, and we have in supported employment and a lot of national initiatives talking about employer engagement. So I have a lot of thoughts about employer engagement, and let's get to them, right? I think there's a lot of myths around employer engagement, because I think that one of those things that happens is that there's this concept that employer engagement is a broad reaching activity. Like we say, geez, if we could only educate employers, right? Or who exactly is that they're talking about? Who are they, right? And I just don't think there is an entity that is that you could say are employers, right? I mean, they don't associate with one another necessarily. They range in size from somebody who's just doing work on his or her own and hires somebody to be their helper to corporate America, right? Another one of those myths is this notion that businesses or employers need to be educated about disability. No, they don't. All right, they already are educated about disability. And what is disability, right? I mean, one of the things that I learned from people that I was working with who are, involved in the Autism Self-Advocacy Network, what they always told me, and it's really stuck with me, as I said about people who experience autism, was if you know one person with autism, you know one person with autism. Right? If you know one person with a disability, that means you know one person with a disability, because no two people with disabilities are the same. No two people with disabilities are alike, even if they experience the same sort of condition of disability, right? If we were to consider, let's say, Down syndrome, right, which is a chromosomal thing, right? How many people do you know who have Down syndrome who are the same? They're not, right? They might have some characteristics that are similar. They might have some vocal characteristics that are similar, but they're different as all get out, right? So we need to get out of this notion that we need to sell disability, because it doesn't help us. It doesn't help the people that we are concerned with, that we want to assist. It doesn't help anybody. There's this other myth, and that's changed a lot, that there are no jobs out there. Well, you all know there are plenty of jobs out there now. In fact, you know, you can't drive down a busy street that has businesses on it, you know, stores and other kinds of services and things like that, without seeing help wanted signs or we're hiring signs. And they're all out there, right? But what we want to do in the world of customized employment, which is where I live, is, yeah, well, okay, well, I know that there's a job there, but I don't know necessarily that that job makes any sense for this person that I'm most concerned about, right? And so, you know, in the old placement model, and even in the early supported employment, and even some of the current supported employment models, it's about, you have this sort of harvest of available positions, and you start looking for people who can fill them, which is the backwards way of doing it, right? It's the backwards way of doing it. We want to do it the opposite way. We want to start with the person and find out the places that are going to make sense to that person. So there are jobs out there. And I'll talk a little bit about that as we move along. The other thing that I just don't think that going to chamber meetings and job fairs and all that stuff is a useful expenditure of time and resources. You know, I mean, I remember, you know, years ago going to chamber meetings, you know, chamber breakfast, and just be besieged by extroverts giving me business cards, right? And and my whole idea as a person representing you know, an organization, an agency that worked with people with disabilities, was how do I get in somebody's ear? You know, how do I stand out? How do I do those things? And what I realized was that I'm just one of how many, right? How many other people who are doing the same thing that you are, right? And then when you come to the other side of it, if you are someone who actually hires people, right? As a director, I actually hired people and realized that, you know, how do you choose, right? How do you pick, right? And that sort of this carpet bombing of resumes and things like that is really doesn't typically pay off. So we're going to talk about employer engagement being a one person at a time process. Okay. Here's the job development comparisons. I think it's important to look at, you know, kind of a side-by-side look at you know, at these things, and you know, it would just kind of give you a sense of maybe the difference. Well, you know, I entered the field at a time when it was placement, and I was fortunate to be on the ground floor of supported employment back in the mid 80s. And when we started doing supported employment, then we had no idea what we were doing. We really didn't. It was a good idea, right? This idea of let's get people into the real work world, and people who were typically left out of it, let's get them in there. But we didn't know what we were doing. So we were all in the same boat, right? Just and trying to connect with one another to pick up some ideas. And the one thing that happened was that we kind of gravitated towards you know, a sales and marketing approach to doing job development. I mean, I remember going to sales training, you know, and all that kind of stuff. And, you know, I didn't know any better, right? So it seemed to make some sense. But I was there at the beginning, right? In the mid 80s and in the early 90s, when the unemployment rate in the US was at, I think it was at 3%, which is considered full employment, because at that time the idea was that there were going to be 3% of the population that just wasn't going to be working, and so that was considered full employment. So a lot of the early supported employment stuff that we were doing in organizations like the one I worked for, you know, who were starting out in this, we were probably more lucky than we were good, you know. And so we were getting people jobs, but we weren't really sure why. I mean, why it was working, and we didn't have time to really think about it. But so that lasted for almost 15 years, And so sales and marketing was our approach. We created brochures, gave people pens and coffee mugs, and tried to get PSAs on broadcasts and stuff like that. Went to fairs and job fairs, got the Skyline displays and all kinds of things like that. That was sort of the way that we expected to do business. We also tried to follow labor market information and trends. What were available positions? What were the kinds of positions? And one of the things that happened in that, kind of a byproduct of it, which is an unfortunate byproduct, is we began to see what I call categorical employment, meaning that this notion that people with disabilities, particularly more complicated disabilities, could do certain things, could only do certain things, right? And that's how we got into what was called the 5 F's of supported employment: food, filth, flowers, filing, and fetching, right? Those were the 5 F's of supported employment. And when you look at the jobs that people got in those early days, and they continue, they all sort of fit in one of those 5 categories, right? And so so it was categorical. If you had a certain kind of disability, that was what you were going to be good at. And some of that stuff still persists to this day. In conventional job development, in the sales and marketing sort of genre of doing it, you have to be good at selling 4 things every time you meet with somebody, right? And those 4 things are you. They tell you that in sales training. You've got to make the potential customer like you, right? They've got to like you. You've got to be approachable. You've got to be a problem solver. You've got, all that sort of stuff, right? You've got to look good. You've got to speak well, all that kind of stuff. So you're selling yourself. And so I go to meet a business person, and I say, I'm Bob, and I'm from such and such, right? Well, that such and such probably has a disability orientation in its name. I mean, there are some places around the country that were like remarkable in terms of the overt reference to disability in their company's names. Okay, so first of all, I'm selling myself. Then I have to sell my organization. I'm from blah blah blah, right? And we do blah blah blah. And as soon as we talk about we do blah, 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 then I have to jump into the third sale, which is disability. Okay. I'm selling disability. It's like Jerry's kids, right? I'm selling disability. And I'm preying upon the good nature and the goodwill of people. That's really what it was, right? And then we started to try to tell people about the economic benefits of this. And I'll dispel that myth in a little bit, okay? So we've done 3 things of selling before we ever get to the candidate. And typically, we're not selling an individual candidate. We're selling the pool of potential candidates. In other words, one of the things that we were trying to do, that we're doing, was we like to refer to it as proposing marriage on the first date. Right? We go in to talk to a business and we're looking, you got any, you do it for something, instead of building a relationship. So in the customized approach, what we've learned was that we need to keep the individual job seeker first and foremost, right? Everything has to come from that person. Everything has to come from that person. And that's why you do discovery, right? It's driven by discovery. And what do we learn in discovery is about what makes this person tick. Who are they? What are they good at? What do they know about? What are they interested in? Who do they know? What do they like? All those kinds of things are really important to create a what's often called a vocational profile, but what I'm going to call the story of that person, right? We're trying to help that person create his or her own story. Because we all respond to stories. We like stories. We like hearing stories. We like telling stories, okay? And because we're driven by discovery, and we take into consideration conditions of employment, and actually what I call our favorable conditions, as opposed to ideal conditions of employment. But we find out all this stuff, and then we create vocational themes, and off we go to where it makes sense. We're going to where it makes sense for what we learn in discovery. And those could be businesses or other places. And the idea is that one place leads to another, and one person leads to another. And that's the notion of the relationship building. And that's where we start to see the impact of something like informational interviews. So we have been trying, we're on a sort of a constant quest for clarity. And one of the things about clarity is that words get in the way, right, of clarity. But it doesn't stop us from trying. But so the informational interview experience really happens twice, 2 different times, right? One of them is during discovery. So as you're doing discovery with people and you're learning about, let's say, skills that person has or says that they have, well, let's go see it. We want to go see it. We want to see them actually perform the skill in a place where the skill is expected. And I like to think of skills as being skills that other people would find useful. So those things are kind of important, right? So we have discovery, and so in order to test some things out, we're going to need to go talk to some people. I was doing a school fair job thing, presenting something up in northern Minnesota, and at a community college there that was. And so this event was being put on by a special ed co-op up there. And so they asked me to come and talk to work experience coordinators about discovery, do an hour and a half or something like that, which again, barely scratches the surface. So anyway, I did this whole thing, and it was over, and they were all teachers, right? It's work experience coordinators, and pretty much left except this one fella. And he came up and he said, I'm putting my stuff away. And he goes, I really like what you said. This makes a whole lot of sense, but I have a dilemma. I said, well, what's your dilemma? And he goes, well, I work with a lot of 17-year-old guys, and they have a pretty high opinion of themselves. And I thought, you just found that out? I mean, weren't you one? Of course, right? And I said, so what's the dilemma? And he goes, well, I have this one fella who keeps talking about all he wants to do is be a structural engineer. Okay. So what's the dilemma? He says, well, he has no math skills. So, yeah, okay. And what's the dilemma, right? And he goes, well, I don't know whether to encourage him or discourage him. So, okay. And so my next question was, have you and he talked to a structural engineer? And it was like I hit him right between the eyes with a hammer or something. He said, what? And I said, well, I don't know anything about structural engineering. Do you? And he said, well, no. So, well, let's go find one. And if you can't find one here in this town, drive up the road 20 minutes to Duluth, and I'll bet you'll be able to find one there, right? And you could talk to him or her about what's the deal, what's with structural engineering, and what are different aspects of structural engineering. And we don't know why this young man, this student, settled on that, but what's the difference, right? And so that's one type of informational interview. Sometimes we call that finding the nerds, right? Finding somebody who knows how to do this. And then the second type of informational interview is going to happen once you have verified themes and you've created a list of 20. Then you're going to go off and try to you're going to be more specific about what you're going to do with that. So I'll talk a little bit more about that here. So we're going to places that make sense for this person, right? And what we believe is that there are unlimited ways in the world how people make a living, and we only know some of them. Other things that we know are that favorable conditions for employment for one person may not be favorable for somebody else. Yeah, we worked with a fellow who hated taking showers and hated getting haircuts and all that kind of stuff. And he lived in a group home, and they had him on a hygiene program to take shower first thing in the morning. I grew up in Northwest Indiana, right outside of Chicago. right? In steel mills, oil refinery country, manufacturing world there. I don't know anybody's dad of kids that I grew up with who took a shower before they went to work in a steel mill. I mean, they might have taken one when they got home after working, but so what was happening to this guy that we were working with is that people were imposing their value system on him, that you had to be, clean and smell good and all that kind of stuff. When I graduated high school, before I went to college that summer, my dad got me a job where he worked at a cement factory, and there was no smelling good there. There was no politeness there. There was hard work and noise and all that kind of stuff. Well, if you didn't ever experience that, you wouldn't know that place exists. And that kind of place might be just the place for a fella who, doesn't want to get dressed up, doesn't want to get clean. So job developers we have to get outside our knowledge base. And that's one of the things that the list of 20 can do for you, is to take you away from the places everybody else goes. So we want to avoid big box, big sign businesses. Carrie Griffin wrote a wonderful article, and if you've ever seen Thought Sauce, you can go to our website, I think, and you can download Thought Sauce. And if you're in online courses, you get that's one of the documents that's there in Thought Sauce. He wrote a great article about the big sign syndrome, going to the big signs. Right. We want to stay away from the big signs, because the big signs have the big HR departments, and the big HR departments don't typically have a lot of flexibility, even if they want to. Right. What we know is that the vast majority of American businesses have fewer than 500 employees, and 1/3 have fewer than 20 employees. And what we know about those 1/3 that have fewer than 20 employees is they typically don't advertise open positions, although you're seeing it now, like I said, with people because they're desperate for employees. They don't do that. And the reason they don't do it is because they would be inundated with resumes, and they don't have time to do that. So they have a tendency to hire by word of mouth and by relationships. The other thing that I learned was that only about 10% of all available positions are ever posted publicly. Okay, so we're battling, if we're going that route, for 10%. Right, of instead of the 90%. We know that people connect over shared interests, right? And the key is knowing how to find them. That's the key to doing this. So what we have learned about and have been doing and teaching is teaching people how to identify and come up with vocational themes. And you need to verify them, and that's where you're going out for those other interviews, just to see if you're on the right track. But once you've had them verified, then you need to create this list of 20 unduplicated workplaces where people with similar skills and interests or vocational themes can be found, right? By that, I mean, let's say somebody has a culinary interest, right? And maybe that culinary interest might include produce, right? So a grocery store would have a produce department. I don't need to go to 3 grocery stores to find out about the potential of grocery stores being something that's going to work for this person. One's going to be enough. Okay, one's going to be enough to tell me. So I want to have a diverse list of possibilities. Vocational themes are the starting point for creating the lists. And in order to do that, you have to avoid job titles and job descriptions. It's really, we've all done this. I mean, I've done this, I still do it, with friends and family and people that I know, they'll go, you know what you'd be good at, right? It's like, you probably said that to somebody, or someone said that to you. You know what you'd be good at? And what they tell you is like a job title. You would be good as a mechanic. They don't say, you'd be good at, you'd be good in the automotive industry. They don't say that, right? That's a theme, automotives. Mechanic is a job title. Mechanic fits in that theme, but it's very specific, right? And so just like the guy who might we talk about structural engineering, I don't know, anything about it, right? Really. But one of the things I think is that I'll bet you there's some surveying that gets done in structural engineering. I bet they do surveys. And so if you're on a survey crew and you're the person holding the stick that's being measured, from, you don't need any math skills to do that, right? None, right? You don't need any math skills to do that. So this notion that there is a specific set of things that you have to be able to do, that's our perception of it. We want to focus on the list of places where people are doing something, right? Where they're doing something. Most of the people that I've worked with over the years, were not going to get hired because they knew anything. And in fact, most of the people I know who grew, growing up, 16, 15, 16, 17-year-olds, when we were first getting into the workforce, maybe you were even younger than that, you didn't get hired because you knew anything. You got hired to do stuff. And the doing is the real substance of competence, right? Shows competence, it shows learning. And when, if you take any systematic instruction classes or things like that, we talk a lot about 3 kinds of performance objectives, and one of them being the psychomotor objectives, which means you're doing something with your hands. And those are the easiest ones to teach. They're not necessarily easy. They're just the easiest ones to teach because they have specific methods, specific things you have to do, specific order, all that kind of stuff. And when you are done, you have a product, you have something that shows you completed it. And that's kind of an important thing. So it's not as difficult as we often make it. It's often, I think simplicity is often hard to grasp. So let me give you an example. So let's talk about something like music as a theme. So there are a lot of people who have music as a theme. And so in order to create a list of 20, let's go say, what we would do, and I know some folks, and we have some folks from Kaposia here in the Twin Cities who have adopted this method, and I think they can speak to how well it works. But let's just say you have this theme of music, and I have a group of 3 or 4 people, and it's really best to do this with a group of 3 or 4 people because I only can see what I see, and all of us. Not one of us is smarter than all of us, right? So we want to have that collective problem solving. So let's talk about the theme of music, and we would say, well, let's try to come up with 20 things that are not jobs, but 20 things that are related to music, right? 20 things that are related to music. And this is just an example of some of the lists that people have, when I've done this exercise in training, that people have come up with, like sheet music, instruments, recording, security, videos, places of worship, fashion, recording, playback devices, right? Not recording itself, but the stuff, production, like lighting, sound, weddings, TV, movies, YouTube, TikTok, performance itself, catering, instrument construction or repair, sporting events, concerts, instruction itself, musical instruction, venues, streaming, transportation, right? The load out, the load in, theater, opera, dance, ballet, media conversion, from CD to MP3, from VHS tapes to whatever it is now, that's the top media, composition, right? Like writing music, festivals. Okay, so here's a list of, I don't know, maybe 22, 24 things. I'm not sure. I didn't number them. But so the thing is that we look at this and we go, is there somebody in your community who's doing that? And the answer is almost always yes. Right? To be able to find at least 20 of these things that are happening in your local community. And you're going to find that some of them, it's easier to find now because, you have the Googleator. And so you can just search, and you can search specifically concert security, video production, whatever, right? So you kind of cross-reference some of that stuff and come up with a list. And then here's a phone number, go call them, right? And here's what's interesting, because because, once you find them, then you got to do some work, right? You've got to call people. And I believe that personal contact is the best bet. And it can be a pop-in, right? I mean, I pop in all the time to stuff. A new business opens up in my neighborhood, and it's not uncommon for me to pop in and say, hey, I just noticed you have a new business. What do you guys do here? Right? That kind of thing. Obviously, a referral from a friend or a colleague is really good, right? We call them warm calls, to be able to say, hey, Jim said that you'd be a guy to talk to. Phone calls would be the next, but don't leave a message, okay? If you make a phone call and you get the answering machine, just hang up and call back, okay? Just do that. Email is the weakest approach you can take because it's too easy for somebody to ignore it. We've done it. I've done it. I bet you all have done it, right? Where you've seen an email from somebody and you go, I ain't answering that, right? Or I don't want to see that. So it's easy to say, I never got it, right? I never got it. And so it's a weak approach. And plus, you're going to give away the farm, right, with this. I'm not interested in disability stuff here. I'm interested in finding out about what they do and the person that I'm supporting, how they might fit, right? And I'll just give you an example of this, because I know a lot of you, those of you who have been in, if I've been your instructor in the online course and we got to the informational interview section, and I've said, you got to do that one over, right? You start out by saying, hi, I'm Mary, a job developer from so-and-so, and da-da-da. Don't start out with that. There's no reason to do that. And people go, well, that's a bait and switch. No, it's not. When I hear somebody say it's a bait and switch, what I hear is them saying, I'm afraid to do this. I'm afraid to do this. That's what I hear, okay? But let me give you an example. I am right now, I'm mostly retired, sort of like the Princess Bride guy, he was mostly dead. I'm mostly retired. And so, I do the online courses and do one of these every now and again, and that thing, but I don't hit the road anymore and all that. But I have a friend who has a son who has lost his job. He was working for some company for a long time, and he got laid off, and it's sort of a pandemic casualty, and he's not going to be hired back there. So I know, like my wife, who works for a staffing service, our friend asked her if she would be willing to talk with him, maybe help him like with an interview, a mock interview kind of thing. So she did that. But I told my friends, I said, look, I'm not having anything to do. I'll help you. I'll do discovery with him and you guys. I'll just do it because you're my friends, right? And so at some point, when we have vocational themes and create a list of 20, I'm gonna go with them. I'm going to try to help him do that. So what am I going to say, right? So when I call that business, I'm not going to say, well, I'm from Griffin-Hammis Associates, because I'm not from Griffin-Hammis Associates. I'm not doing this as a professional thing in my capacity as an associate, right? I'm doing this as somebody's friend. And so to be able to call and say, hey, I'm working with a friend of mine's son, and he's doing some career exploration, and I've got a little bit of, I kind of know a little bit about some career exploration stuff, but I don't know anything about what you're doing. And he seems to have an interest in that. Can we have a little bit of your time to talk about, like, tell me about your story? I mean, how did you get into this? What if he wants to pursue this as a career? What advice would you give him? How simple is that, right? I mean, that's as simple as it's going to get. And the fact that he at some point may decide that he's going to disclose that he has a certain kind of disability, that's his business, right? That's not my business, that's his business. I will give him advice and tell him about the benefits and the drawbacks of disclosing a disability. Let him give him the facts and let him do that. And of course, he's a guy that has he's pretty articulate, and has some education and all that. But I would try to do the same thing with somebody who was more significantly impacted by disability, and his or her people, right? The people that are around them, the support people, same sort of stuff, right? So it's not this mysterious, machination or whatever. It's like having a conversation with somebody about something that makes some sense for this guy. That's it, right? And that's why discovery becomes such a critical element, because it gives you the story, right? To be able to, and it gives the person the story, and we can help that job seeker by, if a video resume seems to make some sense, or a representational portfolio makes some sense, we can help them do that. But where I worked at Federal Cement Products in Hammond, Indiana, nobody had a resume. You didn't have a resume to get that job. You didn't need a resume. No one asked. They didn't care that I had that I just graduated from high school and I was going to college. In fact, I got the nickname the professor, which was not a term of endearment, right? If there was a crummy job to be done, who are we going to give it to? The professor, right? That's how it went, right? So resumes are important where they are important, but they are not universally important. So again, a long time ago, I think it was Hemingway said something about being able to recognize the difference between motion and movement, and so a lot of the stuff we do are just a lot of motion, right? Just a lot of stuff, a lot of activity, but there's no movement. Nothing really happens. So what I'm advising and what I'm encouraging and will help you do, if you ask, is how to maximize your time, make your work effective. There's a difference also between effective and efficient, right? And we tend to, our society has placed this great value on efficiency, when effectiveness is really what we need, to be focused on. So we're helping somebody. I'm just saying, hey, I'm just helping somebody do some career exploration, and you're an expert and I don't know doodly squat about this, right? How would you approach somebody if you were a customer? Because you guys do this all the time, right? If you're, the process, we just were able to buy a new car, right? To trade in an old one and buy a new car. And I just remember, going to talk to the people, the car people, and that whole process of interviewing the car people. That's what we did. We interviewed the salesperson. We did little background stuff, but we did that. So we're only asking for, in the informational interview, about 15, 20 minutes of somebody's time. We're not selling anything, because if you're like me and a lot of my friends, the people that I know, they don't want to be sold. I want this to be my idea. We didn't want to be sold on the car. We wanted the ask questions, get the answer, and make the decision, right? If you ask for a tour, that's what you will get, right? So don't ask for a tour. Ask for 15 or 20 minutes of somebody's time to sit down and talk. And almost always, not 100%, but almost always, that person will say, let me show you around, right? Let me show you around. Just remember, we are all customers almost every day, okay? Sometimes we're conscious customers, we make a decision, I'm going to go buy a pair of shoes, right? And sometimes we're unconscious customers, like with the power company or the water utility, right? You don't think about being a customer unless the power goes out, right? And then you go, hey, what the heck, right? That kind of thing. So we're almost always customers all the time. I asked the people at one of the organizations that I know, that I think has done really amazing, noteworthy stuff with informational interviews and getting people into employment using customized approach, right? And I sat in on one of their team meetings and just observed and listened, and then when it was over, I said, can I ask a few questions? And I said, sure. I said, okay, so I heard some people talking about informational interviews that they had done, and I heard that person, those people say, well, this was a good one. This was a real good one, right? That kind of thing. And so I asked the question, what made it a good one, right? What made it a good one? And these are the three things that they told me. And this was completely in that team. Everybody was nodding their heads. Yep. One was that the business person, potential employer, and the job seeker made a connection, right? So for instance, we talked about finding the nerds. I happen to be a musical nerd. I'm a guitar nerd. I suffer from something called GAS, which is guitar acquisition syndrome. And so I have to really, my wife is my regulator in terms of that, right? But if you wanted to know, if you were working with somebody who was really interested in either guitar repair or sales or building or even performance, and you brought that person to talk with me and we're having a conversation, there's likely to be a connection that's going to be made there, right? I might take a little bit more of an interest in this person because we have a common interest, okay? Second thing would be that you left with a referral, or the way you know that is they say, you know who you ought to talk to, and they give you a name. So remember we had a list of 20 for each one of those themes, and so I'd go talk about somebody, who's, I go to, let's say in the music world, I go to talk to an instrument repair guy, a luthier, let's say, right? And I'm with the job seeker and we're talking, and then that luthier says, you ought to talk to? You ought to talk to Jerry over there. My list of 20 just became a list of 21, okay? And now my next stop is to go see Jerry, because if I see Jerry, I can say, hey, Nick over here gave me your name, okay? And so we get a referral, okay? And people aren't going to give you that referral if you try to sell them something. They're going to try to get rid of you. They're going to blow you off, trust me. And if you lead off with this notion of disability, what also is going to happen is the curtain's going to come down, because so many people, too many people, have a misconception about what people with disabilities can or cannot do, okay? And first of all, that's just bogus anyway, but nowadays, because we have such advances in technology, people say, well, you need to be able to read in order to do this job, yeah? Or have one of these maybe, right? That'll read it for me. Maybe that'll work, okay? So we have, we can utilize the world around us to assist. And then the final thing that they said, which was the one that blew me away, was they said, yeah, and we felt embarrassed to be there. I said, what are you talking about? Can you explain that? And they go, well, yeah, now this person in this guy, they're talking about airplanes. I don't care about airplanes. I have no interest in airplanes or in this conversation. I'm just there. I'm like a chaperone on a date, I'm just there. And what that told me was more than they just felt embarrassed to be there. It also told me that I think one of the characteristics of a successful employment specialist who does this is humility. To be able to say, it ain't about me. I didn't do much here. I just sort of connected the dots and let the dots take over. That's kind of the ultimate in my mind. So what's next, right? You meet with the business, you talk with them, you ask some questions, you get an idea. And do you just leave? Or is it a point where you might say, well, what if we did this? Or how about that? What would it take? That kind of thing, right? Those are way different qualities of questions than, are you hiring? That kind of thing. Because remember, you went there because it made some sense. You went there because it made sense. So it was the right place, right? Throw out a proposal when it feels right. Throw out a proposal when it feels right. And there's nothing wrong with making suggestions. Stay away from superlatives about employees with disabilities. So here's one, probably going to tick some of you off when I say this, but as I reach this ripe old age, I don't care, if it makes you mad. When people talk about the benefits of hiring people with disabilities, here's what I tell them. There is none. There is no benefit from hiring somebody with a disability. However, there are huge benefits to a business or an employer for hiring a quality employee. So what I'm going to do and what I'm encouraging people to do is you find out what makes that person you are supporting a quality employee. What would make him or her a quality employee? What do they have to offer, to contribute, right, to the financial well-being of a business? That's the only reason people hire folks. The fact that that person may or may not have a disability is irrelevant to that. So when we set people up to be heroic and examples, we're doing them a disservice. I really believe that. Okay. So again, you can be mad at me about that, but that's okay. Dispel myths about liability and stuff like that. Yes, one of the questions that we have in the online course is you talk about a business person who is concerned about liability, and you go, well, there is no difference, right? There really isn't. And don't talk about things you don't know anything about, right? Going into somebody's business, some of these people oftentimes will go and say, well, I can tell you about how you can make your business better. And if I was the business person and you came into my business and you were trying to tell me how you're going to make my business better, and you've never done my business, I'd kick you right out. So get out of here, So remember, not everything's going to lead to something else. When you hear no, think no, right? Sometimes no means not now. Sometimes no means no. Remember, move on. You got 59 other possibilities, and no one, to my knowledge, has ever gotten through the entirety of the lists. No one has ever done that, okay? So finally, employer engagement, just like customized employment, best done with one person or business at a time. Employers are not members of some strange cult. They're your neighbors, friends, relatives. People first is always your best bet. Trust the process. And that's the thing that probably is the most glaring, I'm gonna say mistake, is that people just give up on the process. They give up on a process. And the moment you tell yourself you can do it, you can. So I'm going to stop the screen share. I'm going to get down here and look at some of these questions and see if I can. Okay, so folks talking about like the local workforce, there are 527 jobs posted, pre-pandemic, and again, the jobs, that's fine, right? But are any of those going to matter to whoever you are? Some people will just take a job, and that's okay, right? That's okay too. But again, if you're having somebody's having a hard time finding it, you need to get a little bit more involved in here. Someone, Joe Longcar, says he's always and remain frustrated with the work opportunity tax credit and other such incentives. Seems stigmatizing and sends the wrong message, in my opinion. It's really interesting because Neil Romano, who was the Assistant Secretary of Labor for the Office of Disability Employment Policy, it was about 10, 12 years ago or so. I got to know him pretty well. And he was at we were in Washington at a name drop, I'm sorry. We were at this thing of employment, we were called subject matter experts, working with ODEP, and we were having this meeting, and Neil was there because he was the head guy, right? And he talked about incentives and things like that and accommodations as being disincentives. And he said, he talked about what you're doing is you're offering people discount employees, right? Discount employees. And he said, instead of accommodations, you should think about these things being enhancements, right? Or investments that we look at sort of like universal design for a reasonable accommodations instead of a reasonable investment, right? That your investment could lead you to a better work situation for all your employees. And just think about all of the advances in technology that in many ways were created to remediate kind of conditions of disability, touch screens, right? Voice recognition, facial recognition, I mean, all kinds of stuff like that, right? That you know, my dad, God bless him, you know, when I was in high school, when Star Trek was on, right? First Star Trek. And I was just fascinated watching Star Trek, you know, and my dad would come home from work and I'd be sitting, you know, in the living room watching Star Trek, and you go, what are you watching that crap for, right? And then he'd give me the dad wave off, you know, and so, and every dad's got the wave off, you know, Bob Wagner, you've got the wave off, I know this, and, you know, so every dad's got the wave off, and he'd wave off Star Trek. And I go, what, you know, and he goes, that's fantastic. That's just fantastic. And I saw a show on the Sci-Fi Channel one time called How William Shatner Changed the World. And it was all about, and, you know, it was a tongue-in-cheek William Shatner thing, but it was all about how there were things that were in that original Star Trek that are now everyday things, right? You know, diagnostic tables that read your vital signs. That was a far-fetched idea on Star Trek. Or you know, the personal communicator, right? The personal communicator. I saw the guys that created the very first flip phone at Motorola. They were on that show, and they said, "Oh yeah, when we'd see stuff on Star Trek, we didn't take it as anything but a challenge to try to figure out how to do that." So everything is cool except we don't have transporters. So you know, so I'm sticking around at home. I ain't getting on airplanes anymore. Well, that was like I said, a real broad swipe at the whole notion of informational interviews. And so it's just a couple of things just to take away from it, right? That is that you can do this. It is, I had a person that was in one of our communities of practice here in Minnesota back when we were doing the Technical Assistance Center. And she was talking about how she was really apprehensive about doing informational interviews originally. That's, you know, she's from small town, southern Minnesota, you know, moved up here, and she was not a city girl yet, you know, she is now, but you know, so she wasn't somebody who was just prone to go popping in places and talking to strangers and things like that. So she was a little nervous about doing it. And then we were having a meeting of the community at practice. And she said, you know, I have to tell you that what I realized is you can do informational interviews anywhere, anytime, right? And to think about what the lead in is, because we always used to say that it was the inevitable second question when you meet somebody, right? Who are you? What's your name? That kind of thing. The inevitable second question is, what do you do? Right? What do you do? And so that's the lead in, right? Then you start talking about what do you do and how'd you get into that? And people are happy to tell you, most people are happy to, if they have time, to tell you their story, right? Their story. And they want to connect on a story that, so the person that you are, you know, this young man that I'm going to be helping, he's got a hell of a story. I mean, he's got a great story, but he hasn't organized it into a, you know, a good storyline, which is something you can do. So, so again, I want to thank you all for participating. If you have any additional questions, feel free to email me. You know, usually respond pretty quickly to emails. And hopefully, I think there's some folks who are going to be in the summer online class, and I'm one of the instructors for that again. So probably see you again, and or hear from you again. And some folks who names of people who have been in some of the classes It's good to have you on here. And some of my old buddies like Joe and Bob Wagner and Heidi and some other folks, glad that you had a chance to participate. So have a great weekend. If you're going to be here in Minnesota, stay cool. It's going to be hot, you know. The question is about will we be sharing the video recording with you? Dallas, have we done those?
Yeah, I'll put the recording on YouTube and then email it to everyone who registered for this webinar.
Great, excellent. So there's your answer, Corey. And again, we'll see you. Have a great weekend. Have a great summer. Stay healthy. Get vaccinated if you haven't. And because if you get vaccinated between now, if you haven't been vaccinated, you get vaccinated between now and July 4th, you're going to get a beer. Budweiser's going to give you a beer. You know, I know it's Budweiser, but what the heck, you know. But anyway, so we'll see you all. Take care of yourself and good luck.